This story happened to me and my sister Jessica 20 years ago, and I am only telling it because she passed away recently, so I'm doing this in her memory. 2 years after my parents divorced, I finally decided to leave my mother's house and move in with my dad and sister in rural southern Maine. My father owned a large piece of land surrounded by thick forests. The house itself was a two-story building with a basement, attic, and a beautiful wraparound porch. Despite its size and charm, it had been designed specifically for my stepmother, a deeply unpleasant person who tormented us throughout our childhood, mostly through psychological cruelty and occasional physical punishments. For years, visits to that house were dreaded events marked by anxiety. Thankfully, my dad divorced my stepmother during my junior year of high school. My sister immediately chose to move in with him after their separation. I decided to wait until I graduated before joining them. Initially, I believed the house would feel different without my stepmother around, but I quickly realized something was still very wrong there. My bedroom was situated next to my sister's room on the second floor. My sister's room was the only access to the attic, a dark, unfinished space we seldom entered. Not long after settling in, we started hearing strange noises from up there at night. Initially, it sounded like small, hurried footsteps scampering across the attic floor. My sister and I often joked nervously about the gnomes, blaming the odd noises on imaginary creatures. When we told our dad, he dismissed our worries, assuring us it was probably just rats or squirrels. However, as weeks passed, the activity grew more frequent and more troubling. At first, it was just the footsteps. Soon after, doors began opening randomly throughout the house, seemingly without explanation. There were nights when I'd be reading or watching TV in the living room and suddenly hear a faint creak followed by the slow squeak of a door swinging open upstairs. Every time I checked, I'd find an empty hallway and no explanation for the open doors. One particular evening is forever etched in my memory. My sister and I were sitting downstairs, watching TV together. Around midnight, she yawned and decided it was time for bed. I was too engrossed in a late-night show, so I stayed behind on the couch. About 10 minutes after she went upstairs, I clearly heard footsteps descending slowly down the staircase. Thinking my sister had forgotten something, I didn't pay much attention at first. But then I heard the basement door creak open. Confused, I stood up and walked toward the hallway. Standing at the top of the dark basement stairs, I called out to see if my sister needed anything. Silence was my only answer. My heart beat a bit faster as I leaned forward, flipping the switch for the basement lights. The stairs illuminated, but nobody was there. Feeling uneasy, I quickly closed the basement door and double-checked that it was latched securely. Now unsettled, I decided it was best to just head upstairs and try to get some sleep. My bedroom door had always been a bit tricky. Settling had caused it to pinch against the frame. It required a good tug or push to open or close fully. That night, I made sure to pull the door tight and secure it shut before climbing into bed. I left my window slightly open to let in the cool evening air, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. A little past 1 a.m, I was startled awake by footsteps again. This time, they were louder and moved quickly up the wooden staircase. I sat frozen, listening as they moved down the hallway toward my sister's room. Her door creaked open loudly, then slammed shut moments later. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of fear rush over me. Suddenly, the footsteps hurried back toward my room, and I braced myself. To my horror, something or someone slammed forcefully into my door, rattling it violently against its stubborn frame. Terrified, I jumped out of bed, standing frozen, breathless with panic. The footsteps swiftly retreated, rushing back toward my sister's room. I heard her attic door open forcefully, followed by hurried steps running up into the attic. My eyes widened as the footsteps raced across the attic floor directly above me, toward the small attic window overlooking the roof of the wraparound porch. Then, a loud, heavy thud echoed from outside, as if someone or something had landed heavily on the porch roof. Shaking with fear, I ran quickly to my window, slammed it shut, and locked it securely, peering desperately out into the dark. I saw nothing, just darkness and moonlight reflecting eerily off the porch shingles. A few seconds later, I heard my sister's shaky voice at my door. "Are you messing with me?" she said anxiously. I opened my door quickly, relieved to see her standing there, but shaken. "No, are you messing with me?" I replied, voice trembling. She shook her head rapidly. She told me the violent banging on my door had jolted her awake. Afterward, she'd heard her bedroom door and attic door open rapidly, followed by the running footsteps. Terrified, she'd stayed hidden under her blankets, afraid to move until it had finally gone quiet again. Neither of us could sleep that night. Instead, we sat together on my bed, anxiously waiting for sunrise. The next day, we confronted our dad, but again, he brushed it off, still convinced it was animals and old house noises. Frustrated but determined, we took matters into our own hands, installing a sturdy lock on the attic door. From that day on, we both began locking our bedroom doors every night, and I stopped opening my window after dark entirely. After that terrifying night, the activity gradually faded. We occasionally still heard strange creaks or faint footsteps in the attic, but nothing nearly as violent or frightening ever happened again. Yet the sense of unease lingered, always reminding us of what we'd experienced. Both my sister and I felt watched whenever we were home alone, especially after dark. About a year later, our dad announced he planned to sell the house. My sister and I couldn't have been happier. Despite loving the spacious property, neither of us felt safe there anymore. Eventually, a young family purchased it, seemingly unaware of its strange history. We packed up quickly, relieved to move forward and start fresh. Our new home was closer to town, a smaller and simpler house. From the very first night, the difference was clear. It was peaceful, quiet, and entirely free from strange occurrences. No more unexplained footsteps, no more doors opening by themselves. Life slowly returned to normal, and we began sleeping soundly again. Years later, out of curiosity, I mentioned our experiences to a neighbor who had lived near our old house for decades. She hesitated at first, but finally revealed that before my father bought the property, the land had once belonged to a troubled old woman known locally for her reclusive behavior. She'd reportedly been unstable, prone to violent outbursts, and had died mysteriously decades earlier, alone in the old cottage originally built there. Locals had always whispered that her ghost lingered in the area, though my father had dismissed such stories as nonsense when he purchased the land. Today, the memories still send chills through me whenever I recall that night. My sister and I rarely talk about it, preferring to leave it buried in the past. Ben and I started our YouTube channel, American Urban Explorers, about 6 months ago. We'd driven all over western Pennsylvania, filming deserted factories in Aliquippa, the skeletons of old steel mills near Pittsburgh, and crumbling houses we found deep in rural backroads. Viewers loved the mystery of these forgotten places, and we loved the thrill of discovery. So when we heard rumors about an abandoned elementary school in a small town called Maplewood, just a quick drive north of the city, we knew we had to check it out. The old school, formerly known as Roosevelt Elementary, stood at the edge of Maplewood near a set of train tracks that hadn't been used in decades. Its paint was peeling, windows were shattered, and graffiti covered the brick walls. Locals whispered that it was haunted, especially after dark. Some claimed they saw lights flicker inside when no one was there. Others said they heard footsteps echoing in empty hallways. Most people in town avoided the place altogether. But for our channel, it was the perfect spot to film an eerie exploration video. One cool autumn afternoon, we parked our car on a quiet side street, far from the school gates. The November breeze rustled leaves along the pavement. We packed up our camera gear, checked the batteries, and walked toward the property's fence. Barbed wire zigzagged along the top, but someone had cut a hole near the corner. It looked big enough for us to slip through. I remember pausing for a moment, my heart thumping. Something about the building felt off. The silence around it was almost too heavy, like the school held its breath. Ben, on the other hand, seemed eager. He'd always been the braver one. He gave me a thumbs up, and I steeled myself. We crawled through the gap in the fence and made our way toward the main entrance. The front doors were boarded up, but one of the plywood sheets hung loose, leaving just enough space to squeeze inside. As we stepped into the foyer, a musty smell hit us. Mold, rotting wood, and years of neglect. A weak shaft of sunlight slipped through the cracks, illuminating dust motes that danced through the air. I clicked on my flashlight and handed Ben the camera. "Welcome to Roosevelt Elementary," he whispered for the video, panning the camera across the decaying corridor. Our footsteps echoed as we ventured deeper, boots crunching over broken glass and scattered debris. Old lockers lined the walls, their metal doors twisted and rusted. Some were hanging open, revealing crumpled papers, tattered books, and even an old pair of sneakers someone left behind. We passed a faded mural on one wall. It showed smiling kids playing under a bright cartoon sun, but the paint was chipped, and black mold crawled over the faces. I felt an uneasy tightness in my chest as I stared at those half-vanished smiles. It was like stepping back into a forgotten piece of history, both fascinating and frightening. After exploring a few of the classrooms, we found the main office. The door was cracked, so we slipped inside. Broken computer monitors and tangled wires littered the floor. A toppled file cabinet spilled papers across what remained of a dirty carpet. Digging through these, Ben found a roster from the late 1990s. It listed teachers' names, class schedules, and a handful of phone numbers. We snapped some photos and kept filming. Our subscribers loved seeing old documents and personal touches, things that made these abandoned places feel real. Then came a noise, a dull thud from somewhere down the hallway. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Ben swung the camera in the direction of the sound, but we saw nothing, just darkness. An uneasy chill skittered up my spine. Maybe it was a loose door slamming in the wind, I thought. But the air was still, no breeze, not even a draft. "We should check it out," Ben said, mustering his usual courage. Slowly, we crept back into the hallway. The overhead lights, long dead, left everything in shadow. Our flashlight beams flickered against peeling wallpaper. Each step on the old linoleum sent up a hollow echo. Then from around a corner I heard another noise, this time like a scraping against the floor. My stomach twisted. We turned the corner and there it was, a faint glow coming from a classroom near the end of the hall. Ben glanced at me, eyebrows raised. We edged toward the doorway, the camera still rolling. That's when we saw someone inside. A man stood there, illuminated by the light of a small flashlight or maybe a lantern. His back was to us, shoulders hunched. He wore a dirty jacket and torn jeans, and his hair was matted. At first, I wondered if he was homeless, using the school for shelter, but something about his posture felt wrong, almost too still. Ben took a step forward, quietly clearing his throat to let the stranger know we were there. The man turned around. His eyes were wide, unfocused, like he was seeing something we couldn't. For a second, no one spoke. Then the man's face twisted into a grin that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. He started moving toward us, slow but deliberate. Ben backed away, camera shaking in his hands. I wanted to call out, but fear clogged my throat. The man kept coming. We turned and bolted down the corridor, our flashlights bouncing wildly against the walls. Behind us, I could hear him running, his footsteps slapping the linoleum in steady pursuit. We reached the foyer and scrambled out the opening in the boarded door, tripping over each other in our haste. Outside, the evening light was fading, and the air felt colder than before. We sprinted toward the fence, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. When we got to the hole, Ben slid through first, and I followed, cutting my arm on the jagged edge of the wire. Pain shot through me, but I didn't stop. As soon as we were on the other side, we kept running until we reached the car. We jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Ben looked back at the school, but I refused to turn around. I just wanted to be as far away from that place, and that man, as possible. For days after, neither of us could sleep well. Our video footage showed only glimpses of the man's shape in the frantic blur as we ran. We debated whether to upload it at all. In the end, we decided to share a shorter edit, leaving out the most terrifying moments. We titled it Abandoned School Nightmare in Pennsylvania, and it became one of our channel's most watched videos. Local authorities eventually boarded up the school more securely, warning people to stay out. A few months later, the town decided to demolish the building. Ben and I drove by on the day the bulldozers rolled in. We watched from a distance as the ancient brick walls crumbled. It should have felt like closure, yet it only made the memory sharper. Like a nightmare, that decides to stay with you long after dawn.